Welcome back, Love Nation. This is Nina. Make sure you guys like, share, and subscribe. Thank you to everybody that has been coming to my channel. Like this video, share this video, and hit that notification bell so you guys know when I drop my next one. You guys, we're going to get straight into talking about the Justin Baldoni versus Blake Lively case. There is a lot of information that dropped online, and right now we're going to go into Justin's deposition excerpts that has been released online. And I am definitely going to say there's a lot of information in here that is very, very eye-opening toward this case. And again, these are just excerpts. There's a lot we need to catch up on, and just follow along with me. We're going to be just reading through this together. And of course, because of YouTube, some of the words have to be kind of rearranged, but please follow along. And where it says A, that is Justin Baldoni's answer to the questions. The Q is coming from one of the lawyers whom is deposing him. So in this first one, it is asking, did you interview with Glamour magazine? Is that right? Justin says, I don't know which magazine it was. I remember talking about it only once, and it was right after a speech that I gave. Okay, after that TED talk you gave? Justin responds, yes, at TED Women. Next, Justin is asked, do you recall being asked about the question, prompting that answer? Did you ever feel like you were harassed or victimized on set? Justin says, I don't remember that. The lawyer says, okay, but as you sit here today, this is the first example that you have brought up in response to my question of whether you've ever been SH'd. Justin says, that's the first response that I think you asked me, if I've talked about it publicly. And the lawyer says, okay. Justin says, yeah. Now the lawyer asks, why did you feel H'd by what this producer did? Justin says, well, he was asking me to get all my clothes off in a hot tub with him and standing very close to me with his man parts close, like intentionally walking close to my face. It was just him and I in there, and he was using the idea that, no. The lawyer asks, so did he do anything to you? Justin says, I wouldn't call it that. I don't believe I characterize it as an SA. Then the lawyer asks, I didn't say you did, sir. Justin says, yeah. Then the lawyer asks, you were bigger and stronger than this guy, right? Justin says, I would imagine I was. Then the lawyer says, this wasn't someone the size of Dwayne Johnson or The Rock or something like that. Justin says, it was not. The lawyer asks, so if it had come to it, you probably could have knocked the guy out. And his lawyer, Ms. Shapiro, objected. Then a witness said, I'm not that much of a fighter. I would have left. Then Mr. Gottlieb said, you didn't work for that guy, right? Justin says, no. So you had no employment relationship with him? Justin says, no, I didn't. Okay. Do you know who he was? Justin says, I think he told me his name, but now he's being asked, did you try and find him after the incident and talk to him about it? Justin says, no. The lawyer asks, did you find him before you talked about the events in Glamour magazine? Again, Ms. Shapiro says objection. The witness says no. Now Mr. Gottlieb is saying, you didn't want to give him an opportunity to take accountability for his actions and make it right. Justin says, I didn't name him. But you described him and described who he was friends with and the spy you were in. Ms. Shapiro says objection. The witness, I don't know if I described his friends, who his friends were. Okay, so the witness, excuse me for interrupting, the witness is Justin Baldoni. Again, these are just transcriptions that I am reading from this excerpt. Now Mr. Gottlieb says, do you know his name as you sit here today? Justin says, no. The lawyer says, I think you've already talked about your experience with your college girlfriend. Is that right? Justin says, yes. Mr. Gottlieb says, did you ever go back to talk to any of these college friends or people that you might have hung out with mutually to tell them what you were going to do? Justin says, no, I don't know anybody from back then. Then the lawyer asks, do you have any idea whether or not your college girlfriend would agree with the way you have remembered the events relating to losing your V card? Ms. Shapiro says objection. Justin says, I don't know what she would think. I don't know who she is anymore. Then Mr. Gottlieb said, but you thought it was okay to go on TV and tell the world that your college girlfriend had SAU without ever talking to her about it. Ms. Shapiro says objection. Justin says, I wasn't aware I needed to ask her permission to share my story. Then Mr. Gottlieb says, am I right that one of the things that was most traumatic about this to you is that you... And then for some reason the conversation cuts off. And Justin says, a set with all Bahis, I don't know. Then the lawyer says, well, so you're the director and you're the co-founder of the studio and I'm here and I'm asking you, okay? Justin says, yeah. Then the lawyer says, okay, someone has told me that your set is a Bahian set, okay? Justin says, are you sorry? Are you getting me a... Ms. Shapiro says objection. Mr. Gottlieb says, just let me finish my question. Justin says, okay. So let's establish some principles, says the lawyer. You're the co-founder of Wayfarer Studios, correct? Justin says correct. The lawyer says, you were the director of It Ends With Us, correct? Justin says correct. Producer? Justin says no. Lead actor? Justin says second lead actor. The lawyer says second lead actor. And I come to you now and I say, Mr. Baldoni, you're the director of this film. You're the co-founder of this studio. Someone, and his sentence is cut off. Justin says, the policy that is directly in front of me, I don't know if I have ever read this policy. So apparently something was put in front of him during his deposition. And again, I'm just reading from what I'm seeing. Then a lawyer says, okay, so do you know if you've ever had any kind of training on this policy? This is anti-discrimination, anti-harassment, and anti-retaliation policy. Justice says, yes, I believe I have. Then the lawyer says, when was that? Justice says, I think every couple years. The lawyer asks, when was the last time you attended one? Justice says, in person. The lawyer says, at all, virtually or in person. Justice says, virtually. I completed mine last week. The lawyer says, okay. Justice says, for this year. The lawyer says, for the year 2025. Justice says, yes. The lawyer then asks, prior to that, do you recall the last time you had training on this policy? Justice says, I imagine it was 2 years before that. The lawyer asks, do you recall there ever being a training on anti-discrimination, anti-harassment, and anti-retaliation during the production of It Ends With Us? Justice says, yes. The lawyer asks, did you attend that training? Justice says, I did. The lawyer asks, did you attend that training in person? Justice says yes. The lawyer says, where was it? Justice says, in our production offices. The lawyer asks, on the set in New Jersey? Justice responds, not a set, but the production offices in New Jersey. The lawyer says, okay, the production offices in New Jersey near the strike that. And strike that means strike that question from the docket. When Justin says, yeah. The lawyer says, it's a bad question. Okay, we'll come back to that. During that training, do you remember going through examples or scenarios of types of conduct that would be a violation or a potential violation of this anti-discrimination, anti-harassment, and anti-retaliation policy? Justin says, I can't remember specifics, but I do. That was the bulk of the harassment training. The lawyer asks, was there a presentation? Then the lawyer, this goes back to Mr. Gottlieb, because there's multiple lawyers in his room. He says, okay, I'm most interested in what you said publicly about how, in your view, being exposed to adult activities repetitiously affects one's view of consent. Do you recall giving a talk called Boys Will Be Human, a talk on healthy masculinity with Justin Baldoni? Justin says, I wrote a book called Boys Will Be Human, and I imagine I've done a talk or two. Yeah. The lawyer asks some interviews about the subject of the book. Justin responds, is this a speech that I gave, or is this an interview that I gave? The lawyer asks, this is during an interview, and I want to read you what you said. You said, when you hit 11 or 12 years old and your friends have a phone and maybe you don't, and you're being shown things for the first time, and then you start to think that is what women want. And in adult activity, as we know, no means yes or try harder. It starts to become very confusing, which is definitely something that happened to me. But what I'm essentially saying is there's even a possibility in my teens and 20s I wasn't aware. Then the lawyer says, well, literally what you said is, as I read, I'm sure I have crossed boundaries and lines in my teens and 20s, not even thinking about it, simply because of the adult activity I was consuming. So that's what you said. And my question to you is, do I understand your testimony to be that you were essentially making that up in order to make other men feel that you were relatable to them? Ms. Shapiro, Justice's lawyer, says, objection. Justice says, no, I'm sure I had crossed boundaries in my teens and 20s. I'm sure I have. Mr. Gottlieb says, and you think that that was because of the exposure that you had to this kind of toxic adult activity? Justice says, I'm sure that was part of it. It was also a different time, and part of why I wrote the book was that consent wasn't taught to boys. And I wanted to make sure that we taught consent to boys and men. The lawyer says, okay, you hugged Miss Lively on multiple occasions on the set. Is that right? Justice says yes. The lawyer asks, every day? Ms. Shapiro, Justin's lawyer, objects. Justin says no. Then Mr. Gottlieb says, how many times would you estimate? Justin says that I hugged Ms. Blake Lively. The lawyer says on the set. So not outside of the set environment, but at work on the set. Ms. Shapiro objects. Justin says, are these hugs? I'm so sorry. Then Mr. Gottlieb said, sorry, this is. Justin answers, are these hugs that I initiated, or are these hugs that I was recipient of? The lawyer says, you can characterize it however you like. Justin says, I just want to be as accurate in my testimony as possible. The lawyer says, okay. Justin says, as it relates to the hugging, that was my question. That was my question. Which one? The lawyer says you can include hugs that you believe you initiated and hugs you believe Blake Lively initiated. Ms. Shapiro objects. Justice says, like lump them all together? Then the lawyer says, sure, your best estimate. Justice says, okay. The lawyer says, number of times. Ms. Shapiro says, objection. Justice says, maybe a greeting and an exit. So at the most, maybe, again, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. That's my answer to you, Mr. Gottlieb. I don't know. The lawyer says, fair enough. And when you don't know, that's what I always want your answer to be. Justice says, I don't know. The lawyer asks, do you know who Vivian Baker is? Justice says, Vivian Baker is Blake Lively's makeup artist, I believe. The lawyer says, do you know that she testified under oath in this case? Justice says, I assume her testimony would be under oath. The lawyer asks, do you know that she testified under oath in this case? Justice says, yes. I am going to pause right there. I'm going to come back with a part 2. We're going to continue reading this, you guys. Please share your opinion below. Like, share, subscribe. Till next time, be safe and enjoy your day. Bye, guys.